I was replaced the moment I failed, but how did I become the one they could never replace again? I learned the hard way that loyalty in the corporate world is just a polite word for convenience, and I found that out the second my desk was cleared before my termination meeting had even ended. At 28, I was the star architect at a firm I had helped put on the map, but one single, high-profile project delay was all it took for them to treat me like a broken piece of equipment. My name is Elias, and for 5 years, I lived and breathed for Miller & Associates. I was the guy who stayed until the janitors left, the one who missed my sister's wedding rehearsal because a client wanted a slight adjustment to a blueprint that actually required a total overhaul. My boss, Marcus, who was 52 and liked to call the office a family, was the first person to look through me the moment a structural supplier went bankrupt and delayed our flagship museum project. It wasn't my fault. I didn't own the supply chain, but in the world of high-stakes construction, someone always has to be the sacrificial lamb. I remember walking into the boardroom, expecting a strategy session on how to pivot, but instead, I found a 24-year-old named Julian sitting in my chair. He was the nephew of a major investor, fresh out of an Ivy League school with a shiny degree and zero dirt under his fingernails. Marcus didn't even look me in the eye when he told me they were restructuring, and that my vision no longer aligned with the firm's future. In less than 10 minutes, 5 years of sweat and sacrifice were erased. They didn't just fire me, they replaced me with a cheaper, more connected version of myself before I could even defend my work. Have you ever given your all to something, only to realize you were completely expendable the moment things got tough? The months that followed were a blur of gray mornings and bitter coffee. I watched from my small apartment as Julian took credit for the foundations I had laid. I saw my designs, my soul, being built under someone else's name. My parents, Martha and Joe, who are in their late 60s and spent their lives working manual labor, couldn't understand why I was so devastated. To them, a job was a job. But to me, this was my identity. I felt like a ghost watching someone else live my life. I spent weeks applying to other top-tier firms, but the word was out. Marcus had quietly let it slip that I was difficult, or unstable, during the project crisis to cover his own tracks. I was blacklisted. I was 28 years old, and I felt like my career was already a headstone. One night, while staring at a blank canvas and a pile of rejection letters, I realized something that changed everything. I had been trying to be the best employee possible. I had been trying to fit into a mold that someone else owned. The reason I was so easily replaced was that I had been playing a game where the rules were rigged against the players. I had been a cog in a machine, and machines don't care about the individual cogs, they just want the gears to turn. I decided I would never let another human being hold the keys to my livelihood again. I didn't want to be a better architect for someone else, I wanted to become the only person who could do what I did. I stopped looking for jobs and started looking for problems that the big firms were too arrogant to solve. I moved into a tiny, cramped studio and started a boutique consultancy. I focused on impossible renovations, historic buildings that were crumbling, projects with such tight budgets and complex legal restrictions that firms like Miller & Associates wouldn't touch them. I worked with local craftsmen, people like my dad, who knew the bones of a building better than any software could. I stopped designing for prestige and started designing for purpose. If you lost your status tomorrow, would you have the courage to start from the very bottom again? My first big break came from a community center in a rough part of the city. The roof was caving in, the budget was non-existent, and the city wanted to tear it down. Marcus's firm had bid on it and told the community it was a lost cause, that they should just build a parking lot. I took it on for a fraction of the cost. I didn't just design a building, I engineered a way to use recycled materials and community labor to bring it back to life. I poured every bit of my unstable passion into that project. Word started to spread, not about Elias the disgraced architect, but about Elias the magician. Clients who were tired of being treated like numbers by big firms started seeking me out. They wanted the guy who actually cared about the soil and the light, not the guy who just wanted a trophy for his shelf. Meanwhile, back at Miller & Associates, the Julian experiment was failing. It turns out that having a famous uncle doesn't help you when a cantilevered balcony starts to sag or when a client realizes their modern masterpiece is actually a cold, unlivable glass box. Julian had the degree, but he didn't have the scars. He didn't know how to handle a crisis because he had never been allowed to fail. 3 years after they threw me out like trash, I was standing on the site of my own project, a sustainable housing complex that was being featured in every major architectural journal. My phone rang. It was Marcus. He didn't apologize. He didn't even mention the past. He just said they had a situation with a high-profile client and that they needed a specialist with my specific set of skills to save the contract. He offered me a consulting fee that was triple what my old annual salary had been. I met him in that same boardroom. Julian wasn't in my chair this time. He was standing in the corner, looking pale and overwhelmed. Marcus looked older, tired, and desperate. He pushed a set of blueprints toward me. It was the museum project, the one that had cost me my job. It was still unfinished, plagued by structural issues that their replacement couldn't solve. I looked at the drawings and saw exactly where they had gone wrong. It was a simple fix for someone who understood the weight of the materials, but an impossible puzzle for someone who only saw lines on a screen. I didn't take the job. I told Marcus that I wasn't for sale as an employee anymore. I told him that the reason I was now Irreplaceable wasn't because I was smarter or better than Julian, but because I had built a foundation on my own terms. I had turned my failure into my greatest asset. I walked out of that office, not with a paycheck, but with the realization that being replaced was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to stop being a version of someone else and start being the only version of myself. Do you believe that sometimes your greatest setback is actually a setup for your biggest comeback? I realize that the world will always try to replace you if you're just filling a space. But if you're the one creating the space, you become the only one who can stand in it. I learned that true value isn't found in a job title or a corporate family, but in the unique perspective you forge in the fires of your own challenges. What's your take? Is it better to be the star player on someone else's team, or the owner of your own game? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story spoke to you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about turning the tables on life. See you in the next one.